CIS time once again here on Rouge Radio. I'm Reed Duffy and pleased to be joined, as always, by Michel Belanger. Michel, interesting week to say the least in the CIS this week, and I guess we might as well go to it right off the start. The UBC Thunderbirds and the Calgary Dinos. UBC walks away with a 36-23 victory. Did you see that one coming?
Well, you could kind of see that when you get to the last weekend of the regular season. Typically, you'll have a team that plays for something more, that has more to gain than the other team. In this case, Calgary, they had clinched first place the week before, while UBC was not only playing at home, but they were playing for home field advantage. If they won or Saskatchewan lost against Alberta, UBC would clinch a home playoff date for the first time since 1999. So, UBC clearly, and also don't forget the fact that UBC, I believe in week 1 or week 2 of the regular season, I think it was week 2, they led in the final minute at Calgary, and Calgary came back to win with a 85-yard TD drive in the last minute. So a little bit of revenge, on their mind for the Thunderbirds. But clearly UBC had more to gain in that game than Calgary.
And staying out west, 2 more matchups, and both of them were really, again, favorites doing what they needed to do. Saskatchewan beating Alberta 67-3, and Regina and Manitoba, a close one, but Regina does win 31-22.
Yeah, poor Alberta. It was a tough year for Alberta. One of only 3 CIS football teams to go winless this year with Mount Allison and McGill. Really a tough year for the Golden Bears, but to lose like that in your final game, 67-3, that one wasn't pretty. The Huskies knew that they needed to win, combined to a UBC loss to have home field. They came up a little bit short because UBC won, but they certainly, took care of business in their game, wanted to leave nothing to chance. And also, they've had an up and down season, really, the Huskies. When you look at their year, they win 1 week, lose 1 week, and so I think they wanted to definitely, some people could say, they ran up the score against a winless team, but I think in their case it was more a case of they wanted to get into the playoffs on a roll. When you look at Regina and Manitoba, hey, good for Regina, A tough season for them as well. They lose their star quarterback, 5th-year quarterback, Mark Mueller, in the first series, I believe, of their first game this season. And their title hope, before the season, people were looking at them and Calgary and Saskatchewan, to finish in first place, and all of a sudden you lose your veteran quarterback. So, but they hung in there and they managed to find the final spot in the playoffs with 2 wins in 2 games against Manitoba this year. So good for them. I don't think a lot of people give them a chance next week at Calgary, but you never know. You know what they say. Once you make the playoffs, anything can happen.
Anything can happen, indeed. We've seen that a number of times so far this year in the CIS schedule. Moving out east in the Atlantic Conference, again, it was no surprise. St. Mary's 59 to Mount Allison's 21, and Acadia 34 to St. FX's 15. Michel, again, these 2 teams just the class of the Atlantic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, in that case, Acadia had clinched first place, so they had first place wrapped up going into that final weekend. So again, just a solid game by the Axemen, just making sure that they got into the playoffs on a roll. So nice win over St. FX, and same thing for St. Mary's. I think they wanted to send the message after that loss to Acadia that again, some people might look at that and say, 59 points, in a game that you have nothing, to gain if you want against a winless team like Mount Allison. Why would you score 59 points? And but I think they wanted to send the message. Hey, we're still the team to beat in the AUS, even though we finished second to Acadia.
And when you talk about a couple of minutes ago, anything can happen in any given week in the CIS. How about Sherbrooke beating Montreal as we move into Quebec? That was a final of 32-20. Montreal really looked like they were trying to put something together after their last meeting with Laval. All of a sudden, Sherbrooke, who we've talked about at various points of this season, being a potential spoiler, spoils it for Montreal.
Isn't it interesting this year in Quebec, you see Montreal with that huge win against Laval, like you said a couple of weeks ago. I wonder if it's not a question of who matches up better against. Like it certainly seemed in the two games this year between Sherbrooke and Montreal that Sherbrooke is just not a good match for Montreal. I don't know, but they totally dominated that game yesterday. If you look at you look at the final score and you might think, oh, it's pretty close, 32-20, but the Carabins scored a late TD to make that one a little bit closer than the final score indicates. But that's going to be a tough one for Montreal next week at Sherbrooke. First ever home playoff game for the Vanier. They came back to CIS football in 2003, so good for them. It's by far their best season so far. And it's going to be interesting. The two teams met last year in the semifinals, and Sherbrooke actually upset Montreal in Montreal. So this time they get to play on home field. But there was an interesting comment by Montreal head coach Danny Machocha after the game. What they say in football, it's always tough to beat a team, the same team 3 times in the same season and on back-to-back weeks. So that's what Sherbrooke is going to try to do against Montreal next week. So that one's going to be really, really interesting. And in the second Quebec semifinal, Laval hosting Concordia. I don't think, no disrespect to Concordia, but that would be I was going to say the upset of the year, probably the upset of the decade if Concordia beat Laval at home. I believe Laval's going for their 50th. I kind of lost track of how many straight home games Laval have won since 2004. I believe it's 49 in a row overall, regular season playoffs at home since 2004. So Laval has won the last 8 Quebec finals, so we certainly expect them to play for the Quebec title once again in 2 weeks at home against either Montreal or Sherbrooke. And when you look at it, Laval is kind of laughing because, and again, no disrespect for Bishops, but Laval, finished the regular season against Bishops, and then they play Concordia next week. Meanwhile, Sherbrooke and Montreal beat each other up for 2 straight weekends before potentially going to Quebec City to face Laval in the Quebec playoffs. So I'm pretty sure that the Laval coaches are quite happy with that end of the season.
Oh, they have to be very happy about it. And Laval, as you alluded to, Michel, they're playing just angry football right now, beating Bishops 37-15. That comes a week after hanging 40 points on Sherbrooke. Concordia does go past McGill 58-30, but it just doesn't seem like they have a whole lot of hope against Laval on the road.
No, exactly. And you know what? Laval kind of had a rough couple of weeks. If you remember, I believe it was the week before their loss to Montreal. They only beat McGill 12-4 at home. So they had a couple of rough weeks for about 2-3 weeks there in the middle of the schedule that they didn't look like the usual Laval dominant team, but they're certainly back the last 3 weeks since their loss against Montreal. They've just looked like the good old Rouge et Or.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's definitely been a turnaround for them, and it does not bode well for Concordia in the playoffs. But speaking of the playoffs in Ontario, they've already started, and this week it was Queens over Laurier 14-10, and Windsor over Ottawa 50-33. Michel, a very tough one between Queens and Laurier. Both teams put their heart and soul on the line, but Queens is the one that will walk away and go into the semifinals for Ontario.
Well, and a really, really gutsy effort by Queens, because for people who didn't watch the game, didn't see the game, Queens was without their starting quarterback, Billy McPhee, so they had to play a freshman, Ryan Mitchell, who was in his first ever CIS start. So talk about pressure. Queens, who had won their last 6 games, and they were on a roll, going into the playoffs. But then all of a sudden you have to play a freshman at quarterback, and he did great. He had a really, really solid game, close to 300 yards passing. And the key to that game, the big stat, no interception, no turnovers for the rookie quarterback for Queens. Meanwhile, Shane Kelly, Laurier's fifth-year quarterback, 3 interceptions, including 2 in the end zone. So that was the big difference in a 4-point game.
Windsor and Ottawa, another tough battle. The GGs might have thought they had a chance, especially being at home, to advance on further, but the Lancers refused to let them.
Well, and especially after beating the Lancers in Ottawa 2 weeks ago, in Week 7 of the regular season by 2 points. That was a really close game, but the Windsor just jumped all over them. Jumped to a 7-0 lead after 2 minutes of play. They led 10-0, and after that 31-3 in the second quarter. So it was all Windsor in that one. I mean, the GGs made it a little bit closer with 13 unanswered points in the fourth quarter, but it was all Windsor. And in talking about Windsor, how about Austin Kennedy at quarterback? Austin Kennedy, who started the year as the backup quarterback in Windsor, took over the starting role. I believe it was in the first week, and in their first game, and he probably clinched with that game. Mind you, I think the voting for league awards is done before the playoffs, so at the end of the regular season. But still, he might have made a case for himself for the Heck Crichton nomination out of Ontario. 5 TD passes yesterday, no interceptions again, 429 yards passing. Leading rusher for the Lancers with 86 yards, 1 TD. So he finished tied with in CIS football with 20 TD passes this year. So you're probably looking at your Heck Crichton nominee from Ontario right there.
Yeah, and that is a big step forward for them, and they will move on next week, and we'll take a look into next week as well. Right now, Michel, as we go to November the 4th. And we'll start with the Canada West semifinal to the top semifinal, and that'll be Regina versus Calgary. Calgary with that home playoff date, and it just doesn't seem like a great matchup for Regina going in on the road.
No, it's not. And again, in this one, these two teams met early in the season, and Calgary destroyed Regina. It was on September 16th, and Calgary traveled to Regina and beat the Rams 51-1. So that was not pretty. And you do expect a little bit like Laval against Concordia in Quebec. I mean, absolutely no disrespect to Regina, but I think everyone expects Calgary to move to the Canada West final and host the Hardy Cup final on home field 2 weeks from now.
I believe the other semifinal that will decide the opponent for, we assume it will be Calgary, will be UBC and the Saskatchewan Huskies. And what do you see going on in that game?
Well, we talked about UBC. It's going to be a first home playoff game for them since 1999, and as was the case with Calgary, UBC they only lost 2 games in the regular season. One we talked about was against Calgary early in the year. The second one was by only 3 points to Saskatchewan at the end of September, 36-33. So, a little bit of revenge on their mind for the Seabirds, and we talked about Austin Kennedy, the QB from Windsor, being, potentially the MVP in Ontario. I don't think there's any, if there was still any doubt that Billy Green, the quarterback for UBC, would be the nominee for the Heck Crichton out of in Canada West. I mean, he probably sealed the deal yesterday in the win over the Dinos. 4 TD passes, no interceptions, 421 yards. Was the leading rusher for the T-Birds with 60 yards. If you look at his stats, he finishes. He's the leading passer in CIS football with over 2,500 yards. Finishes tied for first in TD passes with 20 against only 4 interceptions. So when you put all that together, I don't know how you don't have Billy Green as your Heck Crichton nominee out of Canada West, and potentially the favorite to win the Heck Crichton.
Moving on to the Atlantic semifinals, and is there any reason why St. Mary's shouldn't advance to the Looney Bowl before we get going on both?
No, I think again. I mean, you're probably looking. If I was a betting man, I would probably have St. Mary's and Acadia playing for the Looney Bowl in 2 weeks. I mean, again, St. Mary's, has dominated Saint FX this year. Saint FX's only wins. Their 2 wins this year came against winless Mount Allison. So I don't see any reason why St. Mary's wouldn't advance. I mean, you look at the stats, you're looking at a Saint FX team that scored 148 points and allowed 300 points this year, while St. Mary's has pretty much the opposite. They scored 296 points to lead the AUS, and they allowed 130. So and again, St. Mary's playing at home. Mind you, there's been a couple of upsets in the last couple of years in the AUS, especially in the semifinals. But I think everyone expects St. Mary's to advance and play Acadia in the AUS final, and that one should be a beauty if those 2 teams meet for the AUS title, because they split the regular season series. So that one will be really interested, especially that Acadia is going to play at home. So that one's going to be interested. And don't forget that the AUS champions host the UTEC Bowl this year against Ontario. So these 2 teams will play. Potentially. I mean, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but, St. Mary's still has to beat Saint FX, but it's going to be a huge deal for St. Mary's and Acadia, well, whoever plays Acadia in the AUS final, because you're playing to play a bowl game at home.
Yeah, and before I got myself all backwards and confused there, St. Mary's and St. FX on Saturday, as well as the second Canadian West semifinal, and they do go for the right to play Acadia on November the 12th in the Looney Bowl. And moving into the Quebec Conference, Michel, again, 2 games Saturday for them as well. Sherbrooke and Montreal, we've talked about Laval and Concordia, and obviously, as you mentioned earlier, it just seems like Laval is sitting in the perfect seat for them. They get a team that really shouldn't pose them too many problems, while Montreal and Sherbrooke once again get to go into the trenches and beat one another up before having to take on who we assume will be Laval for the Dunsmore Cup.
Yeah, you know what? I really like Sherbrooke in against Montreal. For people who haven't paid too much attention maybe to the Quebec Conference this year, Sherbrooke probably on paper and even on the field they proved it. They finished 7-2 this year with their only 2 losses being against Laval. And but don't forget that they're playing a freshman quarterback. They have a fantastic team all around, but they lost 5th-year quarterback J.P. Chouari to graduation after last year when they reached their first ever Quebec final. So this year, they started the year with a freshman at quarterback, and he was a highly recruited freshman out of Cégep this year. So Jeremy Rock, and he has done fantastic in his first season, finished 3rd in the country in passing yards, 15 TDs against 9 interceptions, which is really solid, really solid numbers, especially for a freshman. So I really like him, and again, they probably have two of the top receivers in the country in Simon Charbonneau-Campeau, who was the Heck Crichton nominee out of Quebec last year, and a really explosive player who was one of the top players in the CFL scouting bureaus, their first top 15 prospect list of the year, Ismail Bamba. So both Bamba and Charbonneau were on that top 15 prospect list from the CFL earlier this fall. So two great receivers and a rookie quarterback who has had an amazing first season. So I like Sherbrooke in that one, but it's going to be interesting to see if both Montreal and Sherbrooke get all their players back, injured players back for that one. Sherbrooke in particular were missing their top really explosive returner, sophomore Raphael Gagné, who was injured and missed the game against Montreal yesterday, and also Fonseca, their great linebacker, was also injured. So if they get these players back, it's going to be, they could field an even better roster than they did yesterday. So I like Sherbrooke in that one, but again, Montreal and Sherbrooke have been so close this season. I think any one of these two teams could advance against Montreal. Again, potentially Laval. I know Laval still has to beat Concordia, but I think pretty much everyone expects Laval to host the Quebec final in 2 weekends.
And what a Quebec final that's going to be. The Dunsmore Cup is going to be excellent no matter who's playing in it. It is 4 top teams, but assuming that Laval does beat Concordia, either Montreal or Sherbrooke, great matchup. It'll be a brilliant one to watch for any fans of college football.
Absolutely. I mean, and don't forget, people might be tempted because, Laval won the Vanier Cup again last year, and they've won the last 8 conference finals, but don't forget that last year they only beat Sherbrooke by 5 points at home in the Quebec final, and Sherbrooke actually had the ball. They actually had a chance to win it with a Hail Mary at the end of the game. So that one's not going to be a gimme. And Laval lost to Montreal this year for their only loss of the season. So whoever faces Montreal, whether it's Laval, whether it's Montreal or Sherbrooke, it's going to be a great Quebec final.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun for that one, no doubt. And speaking of a lot of fun, for the right to go to the Yates Cup, it'll be Windsor taking on Western in the one semifinal, and on the second one, it'll be McMaster and Queens. 2 good matchups. But again, a lot of people, Michel, are looking forward to November the 12th because they believe it's going to be a rematch, Western and McMaster.
It could be. You know what, though? Western, as much as you looked in the first 5-6 weeks, especially the first half of the season, Western totally dominated their opponents, but then they slowed down mainly because of injuries. They've had a couple of close calls against Laurier, and then against Guelph, and then even against Toronto. I believe they beat Toronto by less than 2 TDs, and then they lost, really badly against Queens, 37-0 last week in their final game of the regular season. So Western, because of all their injuries in the second half of the season, especially to Donnie Marshall. And I don't know what the latest reports are on Donnie Marshall, but I think it's pretty much 50-50 now if he's going to be able to play in the first their first playoff game for the Mustangs against Windsor. So if they don't have Donnie Marshall at quarterback, it's going to be interesting. And I was talking to a couple of people who followed the OUA really closely this year, and they were telling me that one of the weaknesses for Western on defense is they struggle a little bit to defend against really mobile quarterbacks and quarterbacks who move well and get out of the pocket, and that's pretty much the profile for Austin Kennedy of Windsor. So that one could be really close. I don't think you want to bet too much money on Western against Windsor. I mean, if you look at the team, that goes into the playoffs with momentum, it's probably McMaster and not Western. Well, McMaster or Queens, for as a matter of fact. Queens has won their last 7 games, but Western doesn't go into the playoffs with level of momentum.
No, not at all, and that could be a problem. I know there are a lot of people who still do want to see, especially if Donnie Marshall can be healthy, want to see that McMaster-Western rematch, but Queens and Windsor are not easy opponents, and for McMaster, they really have a challenge on their hands to get through, and can they get to the point where they're going to be worried about a Windsor or even a potential Western matchup?
Well, because you look at the only game between McMaster and Queens, and it was early in the season, first week, so you can pretty much throw that result out the window.
Yeah.
Queens started 0-2 this season. Their first game was against McMaster at home in Kingston. They lost 26-2, but I think both coaches would be the first ones to admit that game means nothing now. That was 2 months ago. And but those two teams, I mean, Queens goes in with 7 straight wins. Is Billy McPhee going to be? I don't know how serious his injury was. Obviously it's pretty serious if he missed the playoff opener against Laurier. But if he's not good to go for the game against McMaster, the freshman Ryan Mitchell is going to have to face McMaster in only his second CIS start. And on the other side of the ball, Kyle Quinlan has been absolutely phenomenal for McMaster since he returned from that 3-game suspension that he had to serve early in the season. And McMaster has been the dominant team in the OUA, maybe even more than Queens in the last couple of weeks. And don't forget that Queens had a tough battle in the first round against Laurier, while McMaster had a bye. They got a chance to rest. Everyone has injured players at this time of the year, so McMaster has 1 week of rest, going into that game, and McMaster has been so impressive of late. I mean, they beat Ottawa 51-24 in the last week of the regular season. Before that, they beat Laurier 25-6, and before that, Toronto 50-14, and I could go on and on. They've been really, really impressive, actually, since their only loss of the season, which was a pretty bad loss. I mean, in week 2, 48-21 against Western. So, like you said, I'm sure McMaster would love nothing more than get a shot at revenge against the Mustangs in the Yates Cup final.
Well, Michel, by this time next week, and when we talk again, we'll know the conference championships. A very exciting time for the CIS, and I want to thank you once again for coming on with me.
Anytime.
All right, my thanks to Michel Belanger, and this is Reed Duffy for Rouge Radio saying thank you for listening.